Hey everybody, welcome back to the Seagull Football Network. I'm Ben here with my brother Braden. We are here to bring you the AFC South deep dive this week. We're going to be talking about the Texans, Jaguars, Colts, and Titans. But before we jump in, I want to hand it off to Braden so he can give us some news.
Yeah, absolutely. So first up, we have two rookie quarterbacks who have been named the starters for their teams. The first of those is Bo Nix. They just announced that he's going to be starting for Denver this season. He is the first rookie quarterback to start for the Denver Broncos since John Elway in, I believe, 1983. So that's just a little fun fact for you. The other quarterback that was named a starter is Jaden Daniels for Washington. I'm really excited. I think both of them showed some real promise in the preseason. So I'm excited to see what they're able to do with their teams starting in the season. One small signing, it's not anything huge. The Cowboys signed defensive end Carl Lawson. I believe he was last with the Jets. Was he anywhere else in between?
No, he started. He played 6 games for the Jets last year, and then started 17 games in 2022 for the Jets.
Okay. Yeah. So hopefully a decently impactful signing for the Cowboys. Obviously, they've got a pretty solid defense. We talked about that previously. But a good, hopefully, rotational depth piece. Another quarterback, Justin Herbert, is back in practice, recovering from his plantar fascia injury in his foot. Hopefully, he'll be ready to go by the time the season starts. And then lastly, the last piece I have for today is Colt McCoy, quarterback. He announced that he is retiring from the NFL officially. He spent most of his career with Washington and was most recently a backup to Kyler Murray in Arizona. So happy retirement to Colt McCoy. He had a nice long career. And that is all the news that I have for today. So let's jump in to the AFC South, starting off with the Houston Texans. Phenomenal season last year. I don't really think anybody expected them to do as well as they really did. Made it all the way to the playoffs with a rookie quarterback. Let's talk about their biggest strength going into the 2024 season. Why don't you kick us off? What do you pick out as their biggest strength?
Yeah, so I have the receiving core as the biggest strength for the Houston Texans. The addition of Stephon Diggs catapulted an already potent group to potentially top 3 in the league in terms of talent. Diggs hasn't had a sub 1,000 yard season since 2017, and he's really given us no reason for us to believe he won't continue to produce at that level. Former Michigan receiver Nico Collins had nearly 1,300 yards last year. He broke out, he earned himself a contract. And now he has an even easier time getting to those numbers because he is now the number 2, and the main focus is going to be Stephon Diggs. 2023 third rounder Tank Dell was having a phenomenal rookie season by all accounts. He was on track to break 1,000 yards. He had, I think, the most separation out of rookie receivers per route run, but then he fractured his fibula in week 13. He is back healthy this year. He's been playing in training camp, and the same production should be expected of him in the number 3 role. Behind the starters, their options there, they could be arguably starters on other teams. You know, Robert Woods, Noah Brown, John Mechie III. They traded a late round pick for Ben Skowronek, who was used in various creative ways by Los Angeles Rams coach Sean McVay. Finally, it doesn't stop there because an argument can be made that tight end Dalton Schultz is top 5 as a receiving tight end. And then Joe Mixon, he's never been ignored. He was a Cincinnati running back, so he got a lot of targets there. So I think that overall, all of those weapons they have in the passing game is going to make this team very scary to a bunch of secondaries around the league.
Yeah, absolutely. I went a similar direction. I picked the whole offense. I think Stroud last season as a rookie solidified himself as a top 10 quarterback. Pierce and Mixon are obviously a very solid backfield, slightly different play styles, which is a good thing. They can kind of complement each other there. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, Dell, Collins, Diggs, and Schultz are a phenomenal receiving core. I'm not a huge fan of the depth past them personally, besides Skowronek. But beyond that, I mean, as long as they don't have any major injuries, they'll be fine. And even if one of them goes down, they still have plenty of pass catchers there. I think my biggest concern would be the potential for a sophomore slump from CJ Stroud. But honestly, based on what we saw last year, I don't really anticipating that happen. And even if it does, they'll still be set up for a good season based on the numbers from last year. So yeah, I totally agree. The offense is absolutely going to be phenomenal. That brings us
Yeah,
up to, yeah, go ahead.
I kind of disagree with the entire offense being the strength just because my biggest weakness was the offensive line. The Texans have some good
Hmm.
starters on that line, but based on past years, it's hard to believe that all of these players are going to remain healthy throughout the season. The two best on the line are probably Laramie Tunsil and Shaq Mason at left tackle and right guard, respectively. They're both over 30. They've both missed games in the past relatively
Hmm.
recently. Rookie center Juice Scruggs spent the season on IR after week 7, and then third year guard Kenyon Green has only played 15 of a possible 34 games since entering the league. The problem here is that there's plenty of talent, but their depth is questionable. They don't have a lot of players who can really step in and be very, very good. And there's very little proof that they're not going to suffer another injury rash in future seasons, especially this year. So, sure, they've got great starters, but what happens when they start going down again? So that's why it's my biggest
Yeah,
weakness.
that's fair. That could certainly be a concern for them in this season. They definitely want to keep Stroud healthy. I think Davis Mills is a perfectly usable quarterback. I think he's fine for what his job is. Honestly, we were talking about this a couple weeks ago at this point during the Hall of Fame game. I think
The
he
Hall of
might
Fame
be the
game.
best backup quarterback in the league, or at least near the top. And so obviously you want to keep Stroud healthy, you want to keep him upright, but if anything does happen, at least they have a decent backup option there for him. I went a different direction with the weakness. I ended up picking the interior defensive line.
Yeah.
On the most recent depth chart that I saw, they had their starting DTs as defensive end Mario Edwards and defensive tackle Foley Fatukasi. Of the two, Edwards has the better stats. Obviously, that's from a different position, though. He's historically an edge rusher, not a defensive tackle. But the Texans are absolutely loaded at edge rusher with Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, two of the best in the league right now to begin with, one on each side. So they've kind of moved Mario Edwards into defensive tackle, at least on the most recent depth chart. And then the depth isn't really any better. It gets pretty bad. And if you look at their stats from last season, they were tied for the fourth most rushing touchdowns allowed. So I'm a little bit worried that their defense is going to allow running backs to go right up the middle. I think they're going to struggle closing that in a little bit with the current players that they have on their roster.
Okay, yeah, I can see what you're saying. I won't say that that defensive tackle room is like great, but it is worth noting Mario Edwards is by no means an edge rusher. He's listed on a as a defensive end on a lot of depth charts because he's what's known as a four tech or a five tech, probably a 4I, where that pretty much means he's playing outside the guards but inside the tackles, which position wise still does make him a defensive tackle. He's just listed as a defensive end on a lot of rosters because you've got a 4-3 or a 3-4. It really just depends on how many guys you have down, and so who really is ending versus who is inside. It's the same as an outside linebacker being an edge rusher, despite the fact that he's a linebacker in some defenses. But I will agree fundamentally with the fact that Mario Edwards is not a phenomenal elite player, and Fadakasi is good, not great. So I can see what you're saying there.
That brings us up to the X factor. What did you end up picking out for the Texans there?
Yeah, so for my X Factor, I chose recently acquired Stefon Diggs. There was a bunch of hubbub about this trade, about him getting to Houston, and everybody saying, Houston's about to be unstoppable and all of that. And that's true. They could be. They could be a very potent offense. But there's a reality in which Diggs does not play to the level that he has in the past. He's going to turn 31 in November. Last year, he had only 1,100 yards, which is, a low since I think like 2017, like I mentioned. And in the other 3 seasons he spent in Buffalo, he had an average of 1,400 yards per year. So 1,100 is a lot bit less than what he was expected to get. With Stroud at the helm and other receiving threats around him, there's a chance that he could make a resurgence and the Texans' passing game will be nearly unstoppable. But I think we do need to keep in mind the fact that he might not be the same receiver he was 4 years ago. So Houston may run into more issues than we expect.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pulling up his stats to take a look real quick. Yeah, last season his touchdowns also went down. Obviously, like not by a lot. 2 seasons before he had 10. The season before last he had 11, and then it went down to 8 this past season. So there was a little bit of decline last season that we already saw. So I completely agree. I think we might see some decline, especially now in a more crowded receiver room. So yeah, that's certainly a possibility. or he could pop off and be the same receiver that he was 2 or 3 years ago. I could see that as a possibility as well. I went to the other side of the ball for my X factor, and I went with newly acquired linebacker Aziz Al-Shire. Obviously, I watched him quite a bit last season when he was a Titan. He's coming off of his best statistical season. He had 163 total tackles with 2 sacks and a fumble recovery. But it's also only the second time that he's ever played a full season was last year. He's going to need to continue to command that defense, stay healthy, and take advantage of all the other players around him to be able to continue playing, make an impact on the defense. And so I think he's going to be a good player to watch for sure. And if he can put together a season anything like last year, the Texans defense will be excellent.
Yeah, I agree. I think the contract that he earned from them, it's really short. I think it's deserving of what he's done so far, which is he was an undrafted free agent. He came in, showed he could start a couple games, started more and more, and then in 2023 finally started a full season. And his numbers weren't great, but they were good. They were solid. He showed he could contribute. And I think that Houston is going to provide him an opportunity in this starting role on a team that's very good to play that same way again and hopefully earn himself a much better contract in the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and that brings us up to the notable rookie. I ended up going with cornerback Kamari Lassiter. The Texans allowed the eighth most passing yards last season, so he's coming into a room where there's some opportunity for instant impact. Obviously, they've got Derek Stingley over on one side, who's been excellent. And on their latest depth chart, Kamari Lassiter was listed as cornerback 2. So it's looking like he's probably going to end up starting the season there. And I think it's a really good opportunity for him to get the starts, get the play time, and make an impact on this defense that doesn't have a whole lot of holes on it right now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Lassiter. He's a sideline to sideline guy. He struggled a little bit when he played nickel and safety, sometimes zone positions. He struggled a little bit with keeping his eyes down on the quarterback. So I think putting him in a man coverage position like D'Amico Ryans is going to do wonders for him, and I think he's going to develop very quickly. It's worth noting he is listed number 2. He has been in that starting role all of training camp, but Houston did sign former first round. I don't want to call them busts, but they didn't quite reach their potential. C.J. Henderson, who was a Jacksonville draftee, played in Carolina last, and Jeff Okudah, who was a Detroit draftee and played last in Atlanta. And these two both are there. They both have starting experience. They're not Lassiter level of ability, but they are there in case Lassiter does miss a couple of steps. But he should be a very good contributor to this defense from day one.
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and jump into who you picked out for your rookie?
My notable rookie is offensive tackle Blake Fisher, who was drafted in the second round, 59th overall from Notre Dame. Blake Fisher is insane. There's not a lot of other words for him. Any lineman from Notre Dame is already a formidable player. Notre Dame is very well known for developing elite level offensive linemen, but Blake Fisher is just different. He stands at 6'7". His wingspan is just under 7 feet. He's incredibly strong, well-developed footwork. A lot of teams talked about how incredibly talented this man was. The reason he fell to the second round, which I say fall, I mean, the second round is nothing to be crying about. But the reason that he fell to the second round is he is a developmental tackle.
Mm-hmm.
He struggles against speed rushes, doesn't always place his punches soon enough in the rep. He seems to not exactly know how to use his length and speed together yet. But that's going to happen. He's going to learn. In Houston, he has no pressure to start. He can sit behind 30-year-old Laramie Tunsil until he's ready to play. And when he does, he could be a top 10 tackle right off the bat. He is that good. Another note, though, is the Texans' health problems along the line may push him into starting sooner than he probably wants or sooner than the Texans front office wants. But if anybody can perform in that position, it's Blake Fisher.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that brings us up to the biggest games for the Texans. I ended up picking out 3, starting with week 2, where they host Chicago. It's a rematch of the Hall of Fame game, but more notably, it is the number 1 overall pick from this last draft versus the number 2 overall pick from the season before. So it's two, big quarterbacks, a lot of investment into both of them. think it's going to be really interesting to see which team comes out on top, which quarterback performs better. Obviously, Stroud has a leg up, having 1 full year of experience in the NFL. What are your thoughts on that game, especially being a Bears fan?
Yeah, I put that game down as well. Same reasons as you, as well as, it's a lot of people are kind of pushing Chicago as the 2024 Houston Texans, talking about how they're going to be that team that's going to jump from zero to hero, that's going to be nothing and suddenly, rags to riches kind of thing. And Chicago playing Houston in week one is kind of a litmus test to see how far both teams have come in just a matter of years because, people don't often remember Houston was like 2-14 3 years ago. 2 years ago. They had Lovie Smith. They beat the Colts in that last game, got the Chicago Bears the first overall pick, got themselves the second overall pick that drafted CJ Stroud. The Bears turned that pick into, multiple picks and Caleb Williams. And so it's really going to be an interesting game to see how these two teams have both improved in those couple of years and see if the Bears truly are what everybody's saying that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. The other two games I picked out are Week 9 at the New York Jets. Kind of like we talked previously, it's a good defense, it's a good test, and it's kind of midway through the season, so we'll kind of hopefully see the Houston offense in full stride. We'll be able to see how they test the Jets defense and those awesome corners they have. And then, as always, had to pick out Detroit as another game to pay attention to, just like we always do. And I think it's also worth noting that the Texans have a Week 14 bye, which is very, very late. So if they do end up with any major injuries, it's going to be a while before they really have that rest week.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a chance for the fatigue to set in. Hopefully they'll be able to hold on and no one will get majorly injured before week 14. What other games did you have picked out as ones to watch?
Yeah, so my two are also after the bye week. Week 16 and week 17 at Kansas City and versus Baltimore. They're two AFC contenders who are top tier, and they could make or break the Texans' season. If Houston wins, it could affect Kansas City and Baltimore standings. If they lose, it could knock them out of the division, in out of that first place spot. So I agree with you that bye week being so late and those tough games being after the bye could really affect how Houston stands come playoffs time.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be a situation to keep an eye on once we get further into the season. All right. That wraps up the Houston Texans. Let's get into the Jacksonville Jaguars as the second team on the list. I'm going to open up with the biggest strength.
Okay.
I picked out their edge rushers. Josh Hines Allen changed his name recently to be less confusing. And Trayvon Walker are the starters on the edge, and they combined for a total of 27 and a half sacks last season. This deadly duo, on the outside of Eric Armstead especially, who's a very solid DT, will continue to terrorize quarterbacks. I think they're going to be a really, really tough duo to be able to block. It makes that tackle position so much more important for every team, but especially in the division. Especially, we just talked about the Texans. They've got awesome edge rushers as well. It makes that tackle position all the more important when you have two deadly edge rushers, one on each side. So I think that's going to be a big, big strength for the Jaguars this season. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that Josh Hines Allen, I mean, he just signed his big deal. I mean, he's a very good edge rusher. Trayvon Walker obviously was first overall in 2022. I think that he's underwhelmed somewhat, being such high draft pedigree. But I think that as a whole, their pass rush is very good. You mentioned Eric Armstead, one of the best pass rushers from the interior last year. Very good defensive tackle. San Francisco let him go. Mix of age and price. So I think that him joining the Jacksonville line also is going to make this team really, really good on that front line. My biggest strength went to the other side of the ball. I chose the receiving core. This is the strongest receiving core Trevor Lawrence has ever had. And yes, I say that with Calvin Ridley being rostered last year. Obviously, he went to the rival Titans, but they did draft Brian Thomas out of LSU, 23rd overall. Christian Kirk has never really been an elite number one guy, but he's a volume producer and he can be clutch when it matters. He has put up 90 to 100 targets pretty much every single year that he's been with the Jaguars, and he's going to continue to be pretty good there. Big game Gabriel Davis, Never really been a number one X receiver, similar to Kirk, but he's been a solid number two in Buffalo for years, and he's going to put up decent numbers, especially with Kirk and Brian Thomas drawing defensive attention. Tight end Evan Engram, I think not a lot of people know this, but he put up a career 963 yards last year. That's a lot of yards. He's consistently becoming a top tight end in the league, and he's going to continue to rise in those ranks. Running back Travis Etienne obviously missed his rookie year due to injury, but he has been elite since then, being very good in the rushing game, but even better in the receiving game. He's a shifty, elusive type of running back with really good hands. Like I said, this is the best group of playmakers Trevor Lawrence has ever had since being selected number one overall in 2021. And as long as he doesn't try to do too much, just serves the role of ball distributor, point guard, if you will, in this offense, it will go a long way toward breaking through that barrier in the playoffs and the Jaguars being competitive offensively.
Yeah, I for one definitely paid attention to Evan Engram last season. He helped carry my football team, my fantasy team. So definitely paid attention to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not fully convinced that the receiving core is going to be better than last year. I think Calvin Ridley definitely helped play a part in that offense that I don't really see anybody filling at the moment. I think their biggest thing is they really need somebody to pop out as a number one. And the reports I'm seeing are saying that
That's
Brian
exactly
Thomas
what Brian
might be able
Thomas
to
is going
do
to do.
that. Yeah, it's, with a rookie, it's a little bit hard to tell. He's definitely a player to keep an eye on as we get into the season. But I can definitely see that being a strength for sure. I think Christian Kirk has been really solid. Gabe Davis, obviously, if he can just keep up the same thing he's been doing, will be a perfectly good option. And Evan Engram is obviously a great tight end. I would put him top 12, maybe even top 10 in the league right now.
I mean, yeah, it's one of those things. I hate to dog on the Jaguars, but just because it's their biggest strength doesn't necessarily mean that it's like elite level.
Right.
The
For
receiving core is the Jaguars' biggest strength, but I'm not sitting here saying that it's elite or really, really great. It's
Yeah,
good. It's good.
yeah, absolutely. That does bring us up to their biggest weakness. I ended up going with their corners. Ronald Darby, one of their starting corners, is 30 years old. He hasn't had an interception since 2019 when he was with Philadelphia. And Tyson Campbell played only 11 games last season. He was dealing with a hamstring injury. He came away with one interception and only five passes defended. It's also worth noting that despite not playing the full season last year, having mediocre stats, he did sign an extension this offseason and became the seventh highest paid cornerback in the NFL. I think he's massively overpaid for his production so far. That's not to say that he doesn't have the potential to be that good, but with both of those two being their starting corners, that's what I picked out as their biggest weakness. On the other hand, I will say that their safeties are pretty good. I was impressed when I was looking through their depth chart. They do look pretty solid, but I'm really worried about these cornerbacks and their ability to, for one, stay healthy, and two, actually be able to defend against the passing game in this NFL. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are the same. I put the secondary. However, I'm gonna really quick go back to Tyson Campbell. I don't think it's fair to
Mm-hmm.
use 2023 as an example of who Tyson Campbell is as a cornerback. He is one of the best man coverage cornerbacks in the league. He is a ball hawk. He had three interceptions in 2022 and only allowed 54% completions, which is very, very good. Campbell, I believe, deserves every dollar of that contract. He was dealing with that injury even in the 11 games that he played. So I don't think it's very fair to judge him on an injury riddled season. When he comes back and when he is playing, he will be good. And in fact, I think he's the only part of that secondary that is good. That being said, yeah, they're going to be probably fielding rotational cornerback Ronald Darby opposite him. He's never started a full season. He's not a good cornerback, to be starting 17 games a year. At the nickel, they're likely playing Chris Braswell, which I think he was a seventh rounder last year or the year before. He's never really played like a starter, but he continues to start. The corners in this room showed everything we needed to see last year. They struggled against any and all passers, allowed over 4,000 yards through the air over 17 games, which is like almost 260 yards per game. That's a lot of passing yards to allow on average.
Mm-hmm.
At safety, they're returning Andre Sisco, who's been good, not great, but they did sign a variety of players to potentially play the other safety position to replace Rayshon Jenkins because Jenkins was less than stellar. They signed Terrell Edmonds, Adrian Amos, Tashawn Gibson, and then Darnell Savage, who's considered the most likely to start this year. This group has a potential to make a few big plays, especially at the safety position. That's the best part of their secondary, I'll agree with you. But they will likely give up far more big plays to the opposing offense than make big plays for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a concern, something to keep an eye on. I just don't know that they've made enough moves. Obviously, they had, yeah, like you said, a lot of safety moves. I really like Darnell Savage. I think he's got some really good potential. But yeah, especially that corner position, I'm really concerned that they don't have enough going on there. That brings us up to the X factor. Who did you end up picking for the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yeah, so for my X Factor, I put defensive end Trayvon Walker. I almost put other first overall pick on their roster, quarterback Trevor Lawrence here. But I believe the onus is more on the rest of the offense than Lawrence himself to perform. So defensively, I really do think there's a lot of pressure on Walker. Obviously, he was first overall the year after Lawrence was first overall. But Trayvon Walker has really, like I said, underwhelmed based on his pedigree. He only put up 13 and a half sacks and a 3% pressure rate in his first 2 years combined. For perspective, the edge rusher who was selected directly after him in the same draft, Detroit Lions defensive end Aiden Hutchinson, put up 21 sacks and 5% pressure rate in the same amount of games. Trayvon Walker's numbers by themselves are not that bad, but he was first overall, and you expect more from a first overall player. Like I said, the Jaguars were ranked 25th in the league in sacks last year. They signed defensive tackle Eric Armstead. He's a very good interior pass rusher, like I mentioned. Josh Hines-Allen on the edge is very good. But it's clear they're still relying on Walker to do more to complement these players. And if he doesn't, this defense will struggle mightily.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I did end up going the other direction with their other first overall pick, Trevor Lawrence. Only three of his top five targets from last season are still on the team. I think if Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas, and Devin Duvernay can step in and kind of fill those empty spots, then he should again have everything he needs to succeed. I think he did last year as well. Obviously, he was dealing with some injury. They didn't pull him out of the season early, and so he kind of struggled through that the whole time. But he definitely took a little bit of a step back last season. I think he needs to shake that off, do what he knows how to do, which is throw the ball accurately, and return to the same level he was on in 2022 so he can earn the $55 million a year that he's making. One stat that I kind of picked out that I saw was he had the most poor throws in the NFL last season. He threw 104 what are considered poor throws, which made up 18.8% of his total passes. So he's really going to need to lock in, focus, get more accurate, throw the ball better than he did last season. And again, a lot of that might be due to his injury, but he needs to be able to know when to pull himself, when he needs to recover. It might not be best for him, but it's what's going to be best for the team. And that's something I think that needs to be focused on this season.
Well, yeah, I kind of agree with that. But obviously, like we talked about, Calvin Ridley played the full season. Christian Kirk did not play the full season. Behind him, they had Zay Jones, who probably at this point in his career shouldn't be starting. The offensive line was dreadful last year. They had injuries. They couldn't protect anybody. They were rotating, 4 or 5 different guys, in different spots along the line as they continue to deal with injury. And then Lawrence himself got injured. So once again, like I said, I believe personally that the onus is on the rest of the offense to elevate Lawrence. Lawrence continues to try to do his job. Lawrence continues to work through these injuries. The rest of the offense is not performing the way that they need to so that he can play at a high level. But I definitely see where you're coming from, and I think that offensively and defensively, we probably hit it on the nose in terms of X Factor.
Yeah, for sure. That brings us up to the notable rookie. Who did you end up picking out for their rookie?
So I picked first rounder, 23rd overall, wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. I talked about him a little bit earlier. He was drafted out of LSU. He is a speedy wideout. He's got incredible 50-50 ball awareness. Adding him to a decently fleshed out receiver room is very beneficial. It allows Thomas to continue to work on his weaknesses, being his middling route tree. He can't really, he doesn't run a lot over the middle, shorter routes, things like that. He's a much deeper route runner. To complement his former quarterback, Jaden Daniels. Thomas only had one productive year at LSU. Before that, he had like 300, 400 yards a year. But during that year, he did show immense potential, and he will develop in the Jacksonville offense. If he can take that X receiver position like everybody expects him to, wants him to, given his size, his ability, his jump ball awareness, everything like that, I believe he provides George Pickens like ball skills, game breaking potential to the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. And I think that that is what they're missing in this offense. Even with Calvin Ridley, that's what they were missing. And I think that BTJ is going to provide that for them. And if he can perform the way that he can, or that he should be able to, then Jacksonville will have a much more potent passing offense in 2024.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I also picked out Brian Thomas. One thing I was really impressed by is I was looking at some of his stats. He's 6'4", 205 pounds, and runs a 4.33 40-yard dash, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, the 4.33 is
He's
unreal,
big, he's fast.
even for somebody
Yeah,
smaller.
I think he is everything that the Jaguars need at receiver. And so if he actually gets that play time, if he kind of steps into that role, if he gets up to the NFL speed, I think he's going to be a really, really solid option for Lawrence this season and moving forward. That brings us up to the biggest games for the Jaguars. What do you have down?
So for my biggest games, I selected lots actually. Week 4 and 5 at Houston versus Indianapolis. Week 13,
Mhm.
14 versus Houston at Tennessee. Week 17, 18 Tennessee at Indianapolis.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're broken up. Yeah, it's all the divisional games. Duh, Ben, thanks. But listen, the fact that all of their divisional games are home, away, away, home, away, and they're paired up like that throughout the season and they're back to back, that is a treacherous way for the Jaguars to play their season. They come in pairs. Two of those matchups are
For
after
sure.
the late bye, making that final stretch of games a potential season deciding situation. And being that any of the AFC South teams could win this division this year, Jacksonville's hoping to take it back from Houston, obviously. Any one of these pairs could destroy the Jaguars' hopes. Divisional games are always hard. The fact that they're paired makes it so much harder. The schedule makers kind of wrecked the Jaguars with this decision. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and I know a couple weeks ago we were talking kind of ranking which divisions are kind of the most violent for their in division matchups. And I think we kind of settled on this one being up there. Um, these teams are always so rough against each other, very physical games. And so pairing them like that, especially, is really, really tough. Yeah, I also had the note on their late bye at week 12. So then having four divisional matchups in the last couple weeks there is just brutal. Um, I also had week 5 hosting Indianapolis. That one's more as a joke. I think it's been 7 or 8 years now since Jacksonville has lost to Indianapolis in Jacksonville. So that one's kind of funny. That's why I put that one on there, hoping that they can hold that and beat Indy again. I also added week 11 at Detroit, obviously a big game. And then I also had week 13 hosting Houston. I had that kind of right after the bye. It's a good chance for Jacksonville to come out swinging well rested, and it's the week before Houston has their bye. So it's going to be a rested Jacksonville against a potentially tired and injured Houston. So it could be an interesting game to keep an eye on. With that said, that wraps up the Jacksonville Jaguars. We will now move on down to the Indianapolis Colts. Let's talk about their biggest strength. I ended up going with the offensive line. I think they have one of the best offensive lines in football, maybe ever. If you go down the line, you have Braden Smith, Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, Quentin Nelson, and Bernard Rallman. Each of those are some of the top at their individual positions, and they're all on one team together. I think it's a ridiculous combo. They definitely had a statistical step back last season. They did allow quite a few sacks, but I think if they just focus, pull together, they could get back to being one of the best O-lines in football and in the NFL. So that's what I picked out for the Colts' biggest strength. What are your thoughts on that, and what did you pick out?
Yeah, so in terms of talent, yeah, you're right. The Indianapolis offensive line is very, very good. The name of their offensive line coach is escaping me, but he's been around for a while. He's a very good offensive line coach. The problem with the Indianapolis offensive line isn't the talent; it's that they continue to struggle with injury, subsequently leading to consistency issues. And I think another reason that they allowed a lot of sacks last year, past just the injury issue, is who was quarterbacking for them. Anthony Richardson obviously is not experienced. He's, a mobile
Mhm.
quarterback who had very little starting experience at Florida before being drafted. So he often was moving around in places that the line didn't expect. He was running, he was holding onto the ball too long, and things like that. And so obviously the line allowed some sacks to him. Obviously, when he got injured in week 4, Gardner Minshew came in, and Minshew, everybody's all about Minshew mania, Minshew magic, and he's great. He's a good quarterback, but he is consistently bottom of the league in time to throw, which means he's just sitting there surveying the field, trying to find his pass, and he's not reading the field correctly. And the offensive line can only hold up for so long. Even a good offensive line, you've got maybe 3 seconds in the pocket. And Minshew did not play with those 3 seconds very well all the time. So I think that that's a part of the reason that they also had a statistical step back this past season.
Yeah, for sure.
As for my biggest strength, I did pick the trenches, but on the defensive side, I picked the defensive line, the front four. Obviously, the headline pick of UCLA product, Laiatu Latu. He was 15th overall. It's the one everybody's talking about. Latu's a very good player. He can play pretty much any position on the defensive line, maybe not nose tackle, but he's got pretty much everything down. But beyond Latu, he's not even going to play as much as expected because there's so many talented players on this front four. Obviously, 2021
Hmm.
first rounder Kwity Paye continues to be productive on the one side. Latu brings that versatile edge rusher to the other side. On the interior, DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart have shown little to no signs of age. They continue to be dominant against the run, and they're very good threatening the QB on pretty much every down. Taekwon Lewis and Dio Odeyingbo, they're not starters, and that's for a reason. But they are great rotational players. They can come in on early downs and win against the run, win a possession that way. In the middle, returning tackle Taven Bryan and Raekwon Davis, who was a signing from Miami, they're going to wreak havoc as rotational defensive linemen. Again, they're not starters, but they're going to come in on very key downs and they're going to make key plays. This line is very
Hmm.
versatile, has lots of different pieces that defensive coordinator Gus Bradley can plug and play. He can use them in various different ways to confuse and terrorize quarterbacks week in and week out.
Yeah, absolutely. That brings us up to the biggest weakness. What do you have picked out for the Colts' biggest weakness?
Staying on the defensive side of the ball, for their biggest weakness, I have the secondary. Colts general manager Chris Ballard continues to ignore the secondary, handing it to inexperienced and spotty players every single year. Kenny Moore II will continue to play nickel, but he is going on 30, and he can only play at the high level he's playing at now for so much longer. We don't know when he's going to start regressing. 2023 second rounder Juju Brents, he showed improvement as 2023 went on, right? He was rookie. He showed, he was learning and improving. But he and his draft mate Jalen Jones, who went in the 7th round from Texas A&M, they're both heading into their sophomore years. They are going to experience bumps and bruises still. And I'm not confident in them holding the outside. Both of them being second years, both of them playing on the outside. It's going to be a rough year. At safety, Julian Blackman and Nick Cross, they were solid, but nothing really special. And with the cornerbacks that they're working with, it's going to be a really rough year for this secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. I picked out the exact same thing, the secondary. I like Blackman and Kenny Moore. I think they're both solid players. Like you said, for how much longer, we don't really know. But up to this point, they've both been pretty good. Yeah, but having two starting corners who are coming out of rookie seasons is not my favorite move, especially because if you look at their stats, they didn't really have a whole lot of impact on the stat sheet, which of course doesn't say everything about their season. Um, but it's still just dangerous handing it off to two very young players with very little experience. And then Nick Cross, I'm a little concerned about. In his 2 seasons he's played, he's only had one interception and 2 passes defended. Not great stats there either. So really, the whole secondary as a whole is going to have to step up. Otherwise, I think they're just going to get burnt over the top every single game that they play, and it's going to be a really long season for them. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. Picked out the same thing. So that brings us up to the X factor. I ended up going with quarterback Anthony Richardson. I watched a couple of his games. I wasn't super impressed. Obviously, he's a rookie. He was starting very, very early. He did have 3 passing touchdowns and only 1 interception, He also only had 59.5% completion rate, and he ended up taking 7 sacks in the 4 games that he played. It's also worth noting that he only finished 2 of those games. He left the other 2 due to injury and then didn't finish the rest of the season because of injury. He also had 4 rushing touchdowns. I know he's very physical. He's an athletic guy, so that's something I think we can continue to expect. But he's going to have to stay healthy this season if he wants to really make an impact on his team. I know that was something I heard before he got drafted, was he's a little too flippant with how he uses his body. He's too willing to just throw it at people. And so I'd like to see him kind of pull that back a little bit, run when it's safe, slide, get down, protect himself, and focus on getting better at passing the ball. I also heard out of they're having joint practice with the Bengals, and I heard that a lot of the Bengals defensive players were starting to get a little loud about the fact that he doesn't throw the ball, he only runs it, and when he does throw it, he doesn't throw to receivers, he throws to spots on the field. So I think there's definitely some room for improvement for Richardson. I think he has to develop his passing ability and stay healthy. And if he can do those 2 things, I think they'll have a great season. But otherwise, I think they might be in for an injury-riddled season where somebody like Sam Ellinger might have to come in and try to lead this offense the rest of the season. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Anthony Richardson, he only started, 18 games or something like that at Florida when he was in college. He was a dynamic game-breaking player, but he declared for the NFL very early. The games he did play in 2023, like you said, he put up good numbers. He thrived in head coach Shane Steichen's offense. And it's worth noting that Shane Steichen is the player who made, or is the coach, excuse me, who made Jalen Hurts the player that he is. Jalen Hurts is clearly much better when he's in a specific type of system, and that's okay. There's nothing to be ashamed of when you're a system quarterback. If you're playing to the system and you're distributing the ball where it needs to go and you're playing in the system that you're in, it's a good thing. Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback. Anthony Richardson has the ability to be a good quarterback if he just plays within Steichen's system, and Steichen can give him that. However, when he was injured in week 4 of the season, he was declared out indefinitely. The Colts obviously scrambled for a replacement. They found a serviceable one in Gardner Minshew. I believe that with Richardson, they could have won more games, potentially given the Texans a more difficult challenge for the division. And then this offseason, the Colts signed Joe Flacco. He showed great ability to step in and perform as a backup in Cleveland in 2023. But if Anthony Richardson remains healthy, plays to the system, improves his passing, and continues to use his legs in a safe, responsible, and yet dynamic way, I think it gives them a far better chance to have a winning record and actually compete for the AFC South this year. So if Richardson's healthy, they're a competitor in the division. If he's not, I don't see Joe Flacco really bringing them to the heights that he brought Cleveland last year.
All right, that brings us up to the notable rookie. Who did you end up picking out for that?
Yeah, so I picked a second rounder, 52nd overall wide receiver Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. A.D. Mitchell, he was given a first round grade by many teams, many analysts all across the league. Based on his physical ability, most people were expecting him to go in the first round. Everybody was mocking him to different teams in the first round. A lot of the time I saw Kansas City or Buffalo taking him because he is a number 1 receiver potential. However, before the draft, there started to come out like some rumblings about his performance in the in-person interviews that teams started to have. That happens, a week or 2 weeks before the draft. These interviews, people started saying that his attitude was less than stellar. He may not be the best locker room presence. He doesn't get the ball. He starts checking out a little bit. Though we don't know for sure what that looked like, how those interviews went, or truly if that attitude was real or if it was more of just, teams talking or just rumors, it did hurt his draft stock regardless. It's a very strong receiver class, so clearly some teams just decided it was better to go with a different receiver who they knew had a clean track record of attitude. So A.D. Mitchell did fall to number 52 in the second round. However, given that if he does have these attitude issues, if Indianapolis can work through them and help him, put him in a position to succeed, Mitchell has the potential to be one of the best receivers in the 2024 receiver class. Mitchell, paired with Michael Pittman Jr., is going to be a very formidable duo in Shane Steichen's offense with Anthony Richardson and his bazooka of an arm. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I picked out the same thing. That's 3 out of 4 that we ended up agreeing on here, so that's a good sign. Feels like we know what's going
Yeah.
on with the Colts. Yeah, I think he comes into a decent receiver room. Obviously, MPJ is great. I think he's super underrated. We just talked about that recently as well. But I think it could definitely benefit from another larger receiver. I think the quality kind of declines after MPJ currently. You've got Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, both younger guys. They're good. They're serviceable.
Yeah.
Um, but I think having another larger receiver, somebody who can come in and fill that X receiver role, maybe move MPJ into the slot a little bit more, have him play the other side. He's a really dynamic receiver, so there's definitely options for him. I think it's going to be really beneficial for the offense and especially for Richardson moving forward as they're trying to develop his passing a little bit more. Give him more options, give him better options, and then, yeah, let his arm do the work. So that brings us up to the biggest games. I picked out three. First off, it's worth noting that the Colts also have a Week 14 bye very late in the season. The schedulers kind of screwed over the AFC South a little bit, it feels like, with these late bye weeks. That's two 14s and a 12 of the three teams we've talked about so far. So really, really late byes. It's going to be very difficult for these teams. But the three games I picked out are nearly consecutive. I ended up going with Week 5 at Jacksonville. Like I said before, the Colts have not won in Jacksonville for 7 or 8 years, I believe. So that's a kind of a funny pattern, one that I'm sure Colts fans are hoping they break. Then I have Week 6 at Tennessee and Week 8 at Houston. That is all three of their away divisional games, almost back to back to back. There's one game in between Tennessee and Houston. So that's a really difficult stretch for the Colts. I think they're going to have to really hunker down, focus, play good complementary football to be able to get through that really tough stretch. What are your thoughts? What did you have picked out?
Yeah, I actually had the same three along with week 4 and week 7, that being versus Pittsburgh and versus
Mm,
Miami. It's a stretch of week 4 through
yeah,
week 8 that I have. These 5 games will make or break the Colts season. There's no question about it. These are 5 AFC powerhouses and or divisional rivals. And I mean they're divisional rivals. They're not all powerhouses, but it's going to be a tough division. It's going to be neck and neck to the very end, similar to how it was this year, but I think even closer. Indianapolis
yeah,
has a solid roster. They could make a play for one of the lower playoff spots this year if a couple of games go their way. But these 5 divisional powerhouses are either in the same position as the Colts or better. And so it could be a very tough time for the Colts to try to make this work for themselves. They likely will have to win at least 3, but probably 4 or maybe even all 5 to have a chance at a wild card spot because of this set of 5 games. So it'll be really interesting to see how they perform and see if maybe they can pull off something that we don't expect.
yeah, absolutely. And like we said before, the edge rushers in this division are really really good. Given there's only 8 starting in the division, and all of them are really really solid for each team. So it's going to be really hard for teams to keep their quarterbacks upright,
Hmm.
especially when you have a stretch like that. And I mean, you throw in T.J. Watt with the Steelers. Yeah, Richardson's definitely going to have to work hard to stay healthy. The offensive line is going to have to put in overtime. So definitely a tough stretch of games there for the Colts. All right, that wraps up the Indianapolis Colts and brings us to the last team in the AFC South, the Tennessee Titans. Let's start off with their biggest strength. I want to
Yeah.
hear what your thoughts are. What did you end up picking out as their strength?
This seems like a theme amongst the AFC South, but my biggest strength for the Tennessee Titans is wide receiver. As befits a Cincinnati-esque offense, given that their head coach was former offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and Tyler Boyd headline this group. 3 really solid, pass-heavy, deep catchers. They're all bound to get very, very many targets from strong-armed Will Levis. Levis fits exactly what Brian Callahan loves in a quarterback. He's got that strong arm. He's got a decent football IQ. And it'll be really interesting to see kind of how he uses Levis with these receivers. Hopefully for depth, Traylon Burks can overcome injury and consistency woes. If not, Kyle Phillips and Nick Westbrook Akina, provide serviceable depth if in an emergency. I think that their depth is not great, but it's good. But again, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and Tyler Boyd is an incredibly good receiving core. It almost resembles the Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd trio that Cincinnati had. And it's very clear that Callahan has a plan. He's going to be pass first, and it's going to be a very dynamic passing game.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited personally about what the receivers are going to do this year. a super different look than it was last year. Even bringing in two starting receivers is a big deal. I think it helps that we're kind of sliding Nick Westbrook-Akina back into that wide receiver four spot, 4 or 5. That's where he really shines. That's where he does the best. We've talked about this in the past, how unfortunately he kept kind of getting pushed up into that wide receiver 1 and 2 spot. It's not his role. It's not where he belongs. But he's been a really, really solid option for the Titans through his career. I think this is his 5th or 6th year. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what the receivers do. I ended up going the opposite side of the ball with the new look secondary that the Titans have. I think the additions of L'Jarius Sneed, Chidobe Awuzie, Jamal Adams, and Quandre Diggs are already a really big change
Hmm.
from a secondary that has suffered for years. I remember, I think it was 2020. It'd be 3rd and 4, and our cornerbacks would be sitting 9 yards off the line of scrimmage. Terrible, terrible secondary for years now. So I'm really excited to see these new additions. You add in Denard Wilson's experience as a DB coach, and obviously we have Roger McCreary and Amani Hooker returning. And I think it's going to be a really, really exciting group that could limit a lot of teams over the top. Very excited to see what happens. As of right now, the most recent depth chart I saw had Quandre Diggs and Amani Hooker starting at safety, with L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie on the outside, with Roger McCreary in the slot. So just a lot of exciting additions, a lot of changes, and I think the scheme is going to be a really good thing for these corners, especially.
Yeah, I agree. I obviously I put the receiving core, but defensively, that is the most improved part of the team. Arguably the most improved part overall. It's going to be a very good secondary. Like you mentioned, Denard Wilson has a lot of experience with safeties and cornerbacks, defensive backs as a whole. He worked with Jamal Adams in New York, so that's really good for Adams, obviously. I think he's 29 or 30 now. He hasn't had a very good season in a while, due to injuries and consistency. So I'm hoping that Denard Wilson can coach the
Mhm.
best out of these defensive backs, and I'm really excited to see what'll happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That brings us up to the biggest weakness. I had originally written down pass rush, but I've switched that up slightly because of the potential for Arden Key's suspension to
No, it
be
already got
lifted.
lifted.
Jeffrey Simmons, uh, from what I've seen, nothing official from the league yet, at least not as of a couple days ago. I know Jeffrey Simmons kind of announced it as news, but then the day after, Brian Callahan said they were still waiting on info from the league. So
A league source
it's a little
spoke
fuzzy
to
at the moment. I'm
ESPN
hoping.
on the 17th, saying that it was being overturned.
Okay, perfect. Well, perfect. That means scratch that. I think Arden Key and Harold Landry will be just fine.
And Tavondre Sweat and
I
Jeffrey
my biggest
Simmons.
right. I'm going to go with the linebackers, the middle linebackers on this defense. Um, I think they have potential to be good, but not great. On the most recent depth chart I saw, Kenneth Murray, who they signed from the Chargers, and Jack Gibbons are currently starting in the middle of the defense. Kenneth Murray, from what I've heard from training camp, has been doing really, really well. He's going to be wearing the green dot. They seem to have a lot of confidence in him. Jack Gibbons, I am less impressed by. Unfortunately, the last couple seasons, he kind of worked his way into starting some games and didn't look great. He was a solid special teams ace, not a really great starting linebacker. Fortunately, I think there's some possibility that Chance Campbell ends up working his way into that starting role. He's been shining in this preseason. I believe he led the team in tackles both games they've played so far, and he had the game-sealing interception against the 49ers week 1 of the preseason. So there's a possibility that they're not going to be that bad, but as of right now, they're just kind of middle-of-the-pack linebackers who are starting in an otherwise pretty good defense. So I'm going to pick that as the biggest weakness. What are your thoughts? What did you end up picking?
Yeah, I also selected the off-ball linebackers as the biggest weakness. Rand Carthen, general manager Rand Carthen, obviously did a lot with this team going into 2024. I think that linebacker is one of the spots that he unfortunately couldn't pay as much attention to or pay as much money to this year. The signing of Kenneth Murray is fine. He can be coached up, but he's nothing special. He struggles heavily in pass defense. He's much better as a blitzing linebacker. Obviously he wears the green dot for a reason, but it's one of those situations where he's the best man available and he's not necessarily the best man. Um, he is an okay linebacker, and he's going to continue to be that, and there's a reason that he was signed to such a short deal. Jack Gibbons, he wouldn't make the starting 11 on most other rosters in the NFL. Jack Gibbons is not a starting
Yeah.
linebacker. He is a practice squatter at best for most teams right now. Their depth is a group of practice squatters and the like. They'll do nothing to move the needle if they need to play on defense. I could see Chance Campbell stepping into a role. Maybe rookie fourth rounder Cedric Gray out of North Carolina could play at that role.
Hmm.
I just don't see anything special beyond maybe Kenneth Murray. That being said, like I said, the Titans did a lot to improve this team, but cap space is limited, and they're likely to readdress linebacker again in the 2025 offseason. On that note, though, I was kind of looking at schematically what defensive coordinator, his name is gone, Denard Wilson, on what Denard Wilson runs, on the defense. And he runs very similar things to, we talked about Mike McDonald in Seattle and that Baltimore, using DBs in a lot of different weird, exciting ways. And that being said, when I was researching the Tennessee Titans draft group that first time, like a couple of days after the draft, I was going through every team, and Tennessee, one of the guys that I came across was Jarvis Brownlee, who is not very large, but he is a fast, hard hitter. He was drafted in the 5th round, 146th overall out of Louisville. And one of the things that I was, kind of thinking about was I was like, maybe he should move to linebacker. He's a see ball, get ball kind of guy. And then I started thinking about it more with Denard Wilson, what he runs, and I was like, oh, that's exactly what they're going to do. And I don't know for sure, right? There's some iffiness to it, but I think that there's a very real chance that they might see him more as an underneath safety, a box safety, if you will. And then something else that reinforced that belief in what they're going to be doing is when the Titans signed Jamal Adams. The Titans have their 2 starters. They're going to start Amani Hooker, and then they're going to start Quandre Diggs. Quandre Diggs is a better starter at this point in his career than Jamal Adams. However, Jamal Adams is, like I said, he's like 30 years old. He's very good at see ball, get ball, blitzing, those lower coverage. He can't do deep coverage anymore. He doesn't have that speed. So I could see Jamal Adams and potentially Jarvis Brownlee playing more of a linebacker hybrid, a box safety, than an actual safety, which could very much improve how well this off-ball linebacking core plays going into 2024.
That's interesting. I think that's not super likely just based on what I've seen from training camp. Jarvis Brownlee ended up being really, really solid as a corner. He's currently listed behind L'Jarius Sneed as the cornerback 3 on the outside. So I don't think that's very likely. I could see maybe doing something like that with Caleb Farley, who struggled a little bit at the corner position. I know they're trying to squeeze whatever worth they can get out of him, and I've heard good things from training camp so far. But I think it's more likely that they end up pulling Farley for something like that than Brownlee, just based off of what I've seen and heard from the Titans camp so far.
Yeah, but Jamal Adams.
Yes, but Jamal Adams. I could certainly see them doing that with him as well. But yeah, I'm a big fan of what I've seen from Denard Wilson. Is kind of just let DBs run around and do their thing. They can kind of shift into whatever position they need to and attack the ball from everywhere. So it's certainly possible that he ends up moving some people around like that, which would be exciting to see. That brings us down to the X Factor. Who did you pick out for the Titans X Factor?
Yeah, so for the Titans X Factor, I selected quarterback Will Levis. One of the things that if you dig into his games that you will notice is against middling to low level defenses last year, he torched secondaries. He put up 3 to 4 touchdowns a game, often upwards of 300 yards. But against teams that were better, top half of the league defenses, he was held to around 150 to 200 yards, and sometimes threw more interceptions than he did touchdowns. That's not a very good look, right? Obviously. Levis has an immense amount of arm talent, arm strength. He, is pretty good in the pocket, but all of this talent has to be unlocked. Who better to unlock that potential than Brian Callahan, disciple of QB whisperer Zach Taylor over in Cincinnati? Callahan worked very closely with Joe Burrow as he developed in the NFL, and a lot of Levis's raw talent exceeds that of Burrow. What Callahan is challenged with is helping Levis kind of formulate that intangible side of his game, processing, timing, minutia of quarterbacking on an NFL level. If Callahan can unlock that full potential and bring Levis that intangible side to his physicals, this offense will be a very potent one with the receiving talents they have, and I could see a 2021 Bengals like jump on the offense.
Yeah, I agree completely. I also picked out Will Levis. I think it's also worth noting, you mentioned Brian Callahan having the opportunity to kind of unlock that next step in Levis. If you look at the quarterbacks that he's worked with in the past, it's Joe Burrow, Derek
Mm-hmm.
Carr, Matthew Stafford, and Peyton Manning. Three of those teams, or three of those quarterbacks, led their teams to Super Bowls. Two of them won, not necessarily while Callahan was coaching them, but it's worth noting that he has great history with quarterbacks. It's his first year with Levis. Levis got some starting opportunity last season. And I think the Titans' hopes of success completely hinge on Levis's development. I think he has to, he had ups and downs for sure. It was a roller coaster season. He needs to get more of the ups and less of the downs, be more consistent, and really command the offense. I think he's been handed plenty of weapons. He has a rebuilt offensive line. And so I think he has everything he needs. And now it's just down to him to actually execute and lead the Titans to a winning season. So yeah, I completely agree with Levis as the X factor for this team. All right, that brings us down to the notable rookie. I ended up going with rookie tackle, first round pick J.C. Latham out of Alabama. At 6'6", 342 pounds, Latham is an absolute beast. He has the size to take on any rusher, and his technique in the first couple preseason games looked really, really clean. He definitely lost a few reps. He, had to play catch up a little bit on some of them, but for the most part, he's looked phenomenal at protecting Will Levis as well as blocking in the run game. So he's a very exciting prospect, and with the offensive line coach that the Titans added this year, Brian Callahan's father, Bill Callahan, with time, he could certainly be one of the top tackles in the NFL. So I think he's a really, really exciting prospect for the Titans to have added this offseason. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I know from what I had read, Latham had a couple of character issues before the draft. I know I was worried about them when the Tennessee Titans selected Latham in the first round. I also think that there were
Mm-hmm.
better tackles on the board when he was selected, but I do trust, Bill Callahan in his evaluation of offensive linemen. I understand each team looks for different things, and so far Latham's looked very, very good. It's going to be really interesting seeing him thrown into that left side of the line day one. Rookies starting anywhere day one is tough. Left tackle is one of the toughest. So he will
Yeah,
run into bumps and bruises, but everything I've seen, he's going to be a very good tackle for the Tennessee Titans. For my notable rookie,
yeah, for sure.
I selected interior defensive lineman Tavondre Sweat. He was selected second round, 38th overall. Excuse me, from Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Physical ability wise, Sweat is one of the best nose tackles in this draft. He has the potential to make an impact from day one. He's game wrecking potential type of player. However, some concerns with his behaviors exist. He got a DWI just weeks before the draft and also weighed in at significantly above his playing weight. I want to say like 40, 50 pounds above his playing weight at, I think it was his pro day.
Mm-hmm.
That's really concerning. That's not just like, oh, he gained a couple pounds. He's not staying in shape at all. If Tennessee can overcome these concerns, obviously he's back at playing weight theoretically now that he's had a full training camp. If they can overcome the character concerns and coach him to focus on football and a high level playing potential, then he will be game wrecking. He can play 1 or 3 tech, and he will contribute as a pass rusher and run defender early in his career. Even better, he has a very high ceiling given that potential. So if they can coach him into that, he will be very good for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite things about Sweat is that when he's next to Big Jeff, he makes Simmons look kind of small. He makes him look like a normal person. Um, but yeah,
Tavondre Sweat is a very large man.
yeah, I absolutely love the size that the Titans added in the trenches in the first 2 rounds. I'm really, really excited about that. But yeah, that brings us down to the biggest games for the Tennessee Titans. What did you end up picking out for their games?
Yeah, so first I selected week 15 versus Cincinnati. Obviously, Brian Callahan is not going back to Cincinnati. Cincinnati's going to Tennessee, but it is Zach Taylor versus his former offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan. It could be a very interesting
Hmm.
clash of two prolific passing games. Just kind of one of those
Yeah,
rematch games that I like, or like those, face-offs of former friends or whatever. I just like to watch them because they're fun. And then
right.
also, I have week one at Chicago. I think both the
Hmm.
Bears and the Titans have the potential to be the NFL's darling this year. Rising from worst to first, like I said, zero to hero, rags to riches. They each have a chance to resemble the 2023 Houston Texans. I think they're the two most improved teams in the NFL this year. And them meeting in week one is going to be a great chance for them to measure up their ability next to each other and kind of see really where they actually stand in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have week one at Chicago, and then I also put week two hosting the New York Jets and week three hosting the Green Bay Packers. I think those are some really good, all three of those are really good matchups to kind of test different parts of the Titans. Week one, obviously, the Bears are a very improved team. They've got an amazing defense, great secondary. I think it's going to be a really good test for Will Levis and the offense. Um, Obviously, we don't know 100% what to expect from Caleb Williams, but I'm sure that receiving core paired with him is going to be a good test for the corners. Um, the New York Jets corners are definitely going to be another big test for Will Levis and the receivers, how well they can get the ball through the air. And then they're up against one of the cleanest quarterbacks in football, Aaron Rodgers, assuming that he looks anything like his former self. And then week three, Green Bay. Green Bay has had a lot of improvements to their defense for the last couple of years. They keep adding big pieces. And if Jordan Love, like we've talked about, maintains any of the same momentum that he had last season, then that could be a pretty big defensive challenge for the Titans as well. So those are the three games I picked out there. That wraps up the AFC South.
Cool. Well, once again, thank you everybody for watching our show. Obviously, we love talking about football. We hope you guys enjoyed listening. If you haven't already, go ahead, subscribe, hit that bell button down below, share it with a friend. We would love to have more people to talk to about football. Reach out to us if you have any questions. And obviously, if you disagree or if you agree, leave us a comment down below. Once again, thank you guys so much and have a great week.